All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. My name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a holistically practicing pharmacist. I call myself a holistic pharmacist. I don't know that I've known anyone else that does that. I think we invented that term. I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist. I used to have my own store in downtown Baltimore, and I used to stand behind the counter doing that count, pour, lick, stick, type, and gripe thing that pharmacists do. And after being in my practice for a period of time, I realized that I wasn't really helping people the way I wanted. Giving people medicines for their chronic diseases does not fix any of those problems. All those medicines do is turn down the volume on the body speaking to you. And so I wanted to find a different way to sort of help people and help people understand what's going on in their body. And so I sold my pharmacies and opened up one of various holistic pharmacies and healing centers, of which I have one right now in Hunt Valley, Maryland, which is just north of Baltimore. I see in the crowd here some names that I recognize that are local here to Baltimore. I see some names out in Colorado, either out in Boulder or Colorado Springs, and some names that I don't recognize even, so I'm not sure where you guys are from. I have been known to say that the number one killer in this country is not heart disease. It's not cancer. The number one killer is misinformation, not understanding how the body works and not understanding the true ramifications of our decisions. And that is especially true with the topic that we're going to discuss today. And that should be evident and apparent by that last word on the title there, myth, the cholesterol myth. And so, again, we're going to get into this. I'm going to get a little bit heavy in the biochemistry because my bent on life is to help educate people. I'm not like your doctor who's going to tell you this is what you have to do. I'm about educating you so you understand the true ramifications of your decisions. And then you can live with the results of those, or you can change your behaviors if you want and have different results happen from that. I'm not about telling you what you have to do. I'm about trying to educate you so that you can get a different experience in life. And that's what this is about as well. And so I think it's really important to understand cholesterol's role in the body and what it does and why it really doesn't make any sense to try to lower your cholesterol. And we're going to go over statistics and studies and the prescription medicines and all that sort of stuff as well, so that you fully understand this, so you can make better decisions for yourself or your parents. If you're like me, you're one of those baby boomer generations. And so these are issues that are affecting us, and even more importantly, are affecting our elderly parents. And if you have an elderly parent that is on a statin drug to lower their cholesterol, hopefully after listening to this information and doing some research on your own, you're going to come to the conclusion that that is really against nature, it's against graceful aging, and you're going to do what you can to have that situation change. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, just type it right into the box there, and it'll show up on my screen. I'll be able to answer it for you, either right then and there, or if I know it's going to be addressed a little bit later in the presentation. And I'll also tell you that this is recorded. So by the beginning of next week, this presentation will be on our website, wellbeinggps.com, and will be there for anybody to listen to at any time. I also will do this presentation again live on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you have someone else that you think would like this information or can make use of this information, then refer them to the website so that they can listen to it at their convenience. And also, I'm going to go over some blood tests that I think are important to understand as far as how the body works and to better evaluate what your potential heart future is for you. And so, you can take notes, but you also know that you can go back to the website and see that list anytime so that you can get those blood tests for yourself. All right, so let's hit it. The cholesterol myth. And so the very beginning of the story is that in 1913, a Russian pathologist, a researcher, decided to feed cholesterol, animal protein, to rabbits. And what he found was those rabbits started to get, atherosclerosis, which is clogging of the arteries, that looked very much like humans. And so this is where the original theory, the cholesterol theory of heart disease, started to get developed. But at the time, and even now, many people didn't question this practice. Well, you know what? Rabbits are vegetarian. They're not supposed to eat cholesterol. They're not supposed to eat animal proteins. And so the result that happened cannot necessarily be extrapolated to us humans because we actually are intended to eat animal proteins and to eat fat. So this is the very beginning of the theory of the cholesterol connection to heart disease. And that theory was and is faulty right from the very beginning. And you can actually go to a website called junkscience.com and read more about this and read how this was just a bad foundation right from the very beginning. And then I put up here public enemy number one, and I do that almost, well, a little tongue-in-cheek and a little actually very seriously, because there is a physician. His name is Ancel Keys. This is a picture of him. This is on the cover of Time magazine in 1961. And he was a prominent, influential, for some reason, pathologist that was from Minnesota that did a study supposedly showing that saturated fats in the diet leads to heart disease. The study was the so-called 7 countries study. And because he was influential and because he was, I don't know, a loudmouth, he actually convinced the American Heart Association in 1961 to adopt some new guidelines that demonized animal proteins. Animal proteins are the source of saturated fats, and the relationship between food and heart disease. And so as a society, 53 years ago, we adopted this idea in medicine and in government, and 53 years later, we have still not recovered from that event. Now, Ancel Keys' research was bogus, and the reason I say that is because he purposely excluded countries in his quote-unquote 7-country study where the statistics didn't match what his proposition was, like in France, where they consumed a lot of animal proteins, cheese, whatever, and their heart disease rates were low. So he just excluded those countries. Now, this is the worst kind of junk science imaginable. The purpose of scientific inquiry is to find out the truth about a situation, not to try to prove one's unfounded beliefs. And that's exactly what Ancel Keys did. This is Time magazine from a couple months ago that says just the opposite, and that is that you can eat your butter. Scientists labeled fat the enemy, why they were wrong. And I think this came out last month. And so we're starting to understand that that theory was faulty. However, medicine and government are very slow to change and to accept the idea that they were wrong for a lot of reasons. One, there are huge financial concerns that benefit from our cholesterol theory of heart disease. And of course, those are the pharmaceutical companies that make the drugs that lower cholesterol, and the medical industry that is all about the testing of cholesterol and all that sort of stuff. And medicine doesn't want to turn around 50 years later and say, oh, gee, sorry, we sent you down a rabbit hole here. So it's very slow to change. And that's why I'm so strict and so strident about educating people to make a better decision for themselves. Because if you go to your doctor is going to still say that animal proteins and saturated fat are the reason that we have heart disease and that you have to lower your cholesterol, even though the scientific evidence says just the opposite. So let's have a little background here. So where does cholesterol come from? So number one, it comes from our diet and it comes from our bodies. Diet, saturated fats, eggs, fish, chicken, beef, turkey, cheese. And from our bodies. But here are the facts. 75% of the cholesterol in your body is actually made by your liver. And when you decrease your cholesterol consumption in your diet, your liver will merely increase production because your body needs a certain amount of cholesterol. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. Cholesterol is very, very important for many functions in the body. It's not a mistake that your liver creates cholesterol. Why does the body make cholesterol? Well, cholesterol is one of the distinguishing factors that separates animals from plants, and it allows for, one, a functioning nervous system, and to mobility. It's actually cholesterol that allows us to be able to move around, because nerve conduction and muscle contraction happen as on a elemental level, happen as ions go across cell membranes. So sodium and potassium and magnesium and other electrolytes go across a cell membrane. What allows that to happen is cholesterol. Plants do not have cholesterol, and that's one of the reasons why they don't have mobility like we have now. And the same thing, a functioning nervous system. So cholesterol is a component of every single cell membrane in your body. It plays a role in what goes in and out of cells. And if there was no cholesterol, you couldn't move. You wouldn't have a nervous system that works. You wouldn't have the ability to move. And cholesterol also protects against oxidative damage. And so it's a protective factor in every cell in your body as well. Vitamin D. Cholesterol on the surface of the skin is converted into vitamin D from exposure to the sun. And this is one of the reasons why cholesterol production and thus cholesterol blood levels can increase when vitamin D levels are low. And studies show that people that live in northern climates during the winter, what happens? Their cholesterol levels go up, and that's because the body's trying to encourage more vitamin D making, right? Cholesterol is made to help make your hormones. So we're talking about the sex hormones. And again, when women go through menopause, oftentimes cholesterol production in the liver increases and blood levels of cholesterol go up. And that's because the body has detected an imbalance, and it's trying to fix that by increasing more of the root material that the body uses to make it. And also cortisol. This is the hormone of stress, and also explains why when we're under stress, our cholesterol levels go up as well, because we create cortisol and the body's trying to have more of the root material to make more of that cortisol. That's why the body makes cholesterol. Some very, very important reasons. And we shouldn't monkey with that. We shouldn't look to change that. We've adopted this idea that if our cholesterol levels are high, we need to lower it. Instead, we should say, if our cholesterol levels are elevated, what's going on underneath the surface that's causing the body to increase that production? Here's some other fun cholesterol fun facts for you, just to understand how important cholesterol is and its roles in the body. Number one, the brain comprises only 2% of the body's weight, but actually contains 25% of the body's cholesterol. If that is not a clue to you right there of how important cholesterol is as we age and for mental function, then you're just not paying attention. Think about this. What do we do with our elderly people? We look at their cholesterol and we say, oh, it's too high, we have to lower it. And then what happens? They start getting mental decline. Doctors don't say, oh, gee, we should take you off that statin drug. They say, well, you're not a spring chicken anymore. This is just a normal function of the aging process, but it's not. What we do in medicine is actually enhancing that process. Here's another fact. Cholesterol sulfate, that's a cholesterol that gets processed in a certain way, actually helps with metabolism of fat. Cholesterol sulfate plays a role with the immune system, especially in the gut. It takes 25 different chemical steps to make cholesterol, for your liver to make cholesterol. That'll become important later when we discuss a little bit more of the biochemistry. So let's understand the pieces of cholesterol, because you all know this story. There's LDL and there's HDL. Now, we've learned that LDL is the bad cholesterol, L for lousy, and HDL is the good cholesterol, H for happy. That's how we remember those things in pharmacy school anyways. So what is LDL? Let's start there, okay? So I know that we've been trained to think of cholesterol in a very specific way, especially because of all the testing that we do and how the doctors and the government actually talk to us about our health and its relation to cholesterol. So we're told to think of LDL as the bad cholesterol and HDL as the good cholesterol. And honestly, quite frankly, this is the exact same way that I was taught to think about these things in pharmacy school. But this is a really big but here. LDL is not cholesterol. LDL contains cholesterol, both in its membrane on the outer shell and in its inside. But really, LDL is a transport unit. And what it transports are fats and cholesterol and vitamin D and other fat-soluble vitamins to your cells throughout your body. All of these components are fat soluble, and the blood and blood fluids are water soluble. And so you need a way to transport these fat soluble components to the cells throughout your body. And so what LDL is, LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. It really is a delivery system for important nutrients and molecules to get around the body. So you can sort of think of it as like a submarine that has a payload. That submarine gets made in the liver, and it gets loaded with these sorts of components with the idea for that to go through the blood and to deliver to cells. Every cell in your body needs cholesterol. Every cell in your body needs fats, needs nutrients, and that's the purpose of this. So the outer shell of this submarine, it contains cholesterol, it contains proteins, and it contains fat. Now this is protective for the ingredients that are inside of the submarine. If the cholesterol content of the outer shell is deficient, like will happen when we decrease the production of cholesterol, then the inner contents become more susceptible to oxidation from the oxygen which is going around in the blood. This is the way nature works, and it's ingenious. And when we alter the amount of cholesterol that our body makes, then we begin to interfere with how nature was intended to work. There's another component that's called ApoB. This is an important, very specialized protein that enables the LDL to actually deliver its payload to the cells in need. And ApoB is especially vulnerable to attack from sugars in the bloodstream, especially fructose. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So sugar's role here, and I put glucose and fructose. When you have high sugar levels and you are interfering with the body making its cholesterol, you are making that delivery system more susceptible to having problems. And this is really important to recognize, because the truth is that if you want to cut down on your susceptibility to having heart disease, don't think about fat, think about sugar. That really is the culprit here. All right, so what is HDL? So HDL has a specific purpose, and again, this stands for high density lipoprotein. It's not cholesterol. It is another delivery system. And the purpose of HDL is to return to the liver the smaller or empty LDL particles for recycling and reuse. So in a perfect world, your liver makes LDL. The outer shell of LDL is made of cholesterol and proteins and fats. And inside that submarine are fat-soluble components like vitamin D and fats and cholesterol, because again, cholesterol is part of the membrane of every single cell in your body. And LDL, all fat and fluffy, delivers those components to the cells. Once it offloads its payload, it becomes a small, dense molecule. HDL goes and finds those and then takes it back to the liver so that the liver can then reuse that cholesterol and those fats, or re-energize it by loading back into that submarine the stuff that it's going to go deliver around to the cells again. And I put numbers in heart disease here because of all of the fat components in the blood that we measure, actually, at least statistically, it's the number of HDL particles that is most closely associated with heart disease, meaning that the higher your HDL level is, the lower the heart disease incidence. Okay, so here's the real determinant, and here's the real important thing here, and that is the particle size of your LDL or HDL. As I just said, when your LDL molecule is full, it's fat and fluffy, and it goes around and it delivers its payload. Then it becomes small and dense. And then it's supposed to be picked up by the HDL and taken back to the liver. So once that LDL delivers its goods, it becomes small, dense. What can happen though if you have too many sugars going around in your bloodstream, and I want to be clear about this, I'm not talking about having diabetes. Once you are determined that that you have diabetes, you are 10 to 20 years down the road in this process. Practically every one of us has too many sugars going around in our bloodstream. And that I'll talk about a little bit more detail, but the reason is because we have things like high fructose corn syrup in our diet, and we have too many grains, processed and refined grains in our diet that cause blood sugar elevation. But what happens is these sugars attach themselves to proteins. One of those proteins is these small, dense LDLs. These LDLs that have just offloaded their payload. So they've gone to a cell through your bloodstream. They've delivered their goods. Now they're going around in the bloodstream, and a sugar attaches itself to it. It's called glycation. And when they attach themselves to it, HDL can't pick it up and take it back to the liver. It interferes with that recycling process that's supposed to happen. And so what happens is a specific component of the immune system called macrophages work to pick up that task. What they do is try to grab those small, dense molecules of LDL and try to insert them into some HDL to be taken back to the liver. Those small, dense molecules, because they're small and dense, get through the spaces and deposit into the linings of the blood vessels in the artery wall. And then when macrophages start to do their work, they get trapped in the artery wall. They can't get out. And that is the beginning of what we call a plaque. This is the clogging of the arteries. This is the very beginning of that process of clogging of the arteries. And so, to say it again, once LDL delivers its goods, it becomes a small, dense molecule. There's the potential for it to get attacked and changed chemically by sugar in the bloodstream, which then makes it so it can't get into HDL and be taken back to the liver. They find their way into the linings of the blood vessels, and part of the immune system recognizes that, and in trying to fix it, it causes these plaques. It begins the process of clogging of the arteries. And so the real issue here is not the number of particles of LDL, it's the particle size. And medicine should know this. They should understand this, because for years, we've recognized the fact that even though we keep lowering our standards on what cholesterol numbers should be, heart disease is not changing. And it's also a fact that forever now, it's been known that half the people going into the emergency room having a heart attack have cholesterol below 200 and have had for their entire lives. But in medicine, because we're too stubborn and because we refuse to say, oops, we were wrong, we just keep lowering the standards. And for those of you that have been paying attention for the past 30 years or whatever, you know that at first we said the cholesterol needed to be below 260, then 240, then 200. Then we started looking at LDL and said it had to be below 130 or below 100 or below 70 for people that have other risk factors. And yet, even though we keep lowering the standards and we keep increasing our ways of lowering our cholesterol medically, heart disease isn't changing. I want to be clear about this. People are living longer, but that's because of advances in emergency medicine. Once someone is having a heart attack, we're good at saving their lives, at keeping them ticking, but we're not lowering the number of heart attacks that are happening. Just the opposite, actually. Okay, so the real determinant here is particle size. All right, so let's talk about the sugar connection for a little bit, because it really does come down to liver function. So in liver function, for the liver to function properly, what it does is it produces these LDL particles. It produces cholesterol to be used to make up the LDL particles and to insert inside the particles. But the liver is also responsible for breaking down sugars. One of the purposes of liver is to take sugar that's in our bloodstream and convert it into fat. This is self-preservation. This is to allow for times of famine. We've been on this planet for a long time, and as a species, we've developed ways of enduring times when food wasn't available. And so we have very keen mechanisms of taking sugar and converting it into fat, which is basically energy for tomorrow, right? So what happens when the liver is overwhelmed? Well, when sugar levels are elevated in the bloodstream, especially with fructose, the liver ends up spending too much time working to convert sugar into fat, and again, that's basically energy for tomorrow, and ends up making faulty or low quality LDL molecules. And that means that they have insufficient amounts of protective cholesterol. And so then these faulty LDL molecules are more vulnerable to attack from the sugars that are in our bloodstream. And we know they're there because that's why the liver isn't able to do its job the way we want it to. And that then causes ultimately the clogging of the arteries. And this is why sugar is the bigger issue when it really comes to heart disease. It's not about fat in your diet. It's about sugar. So how about measuring cholesterol properly? Well, you can do the regular blood test, and that's what all of us do. And I'm telling you, honestly, stop having that blood test done. Number one, the information you get from it is useless. It is not at all helpful in you understanding what's going on in your body and how to fix things in your body. And it sends us down this rabbit hole, sends us into this process of chasing our tails in being concerned about that cholesterol and that number, and the result is no benefit whatsoever. Now, I know that supports a whole industry of medicine, but I'm a proponent of to stop wasting our money and time and bankrupting ourselves and our government and our insurances with all of those costs. There's a different test that's called the VAP test, VAP. And what the VAP test does is measure particle size. Now, here's really the interesting thing. I used to do a radio show about alternative medicine, and I can tell you that a dozen years ago, we were talking about the VAP test, and we were saying that this was going to become the gold standard in medicine because it makes so much sense to understand this. And I am flabbergasted that here I am, 12 years later, telling you that if you go to your doctor and you say, I would like the VAP test, vast majority of those doctors won't even know what that test is, much less what it measures and what to do with those results. The VAP test looks at your particle size. And so the truth is that you could be walking around with a cholesterol of 270 and not be at risk at all because all that cholesterol could be fat, fluffy molecules. Or you could be walking around with a cholesterol of 190 and be at risk because the vast majority of them are small, dense molecules. And those are the ones that can cause the problem. Now, here's the kicker. All the labs do the VAP test now, and it's the same cost. Your insurance pays for it just like it pays for the regular blood test, and it is so much more useful information. I don't know if you can see on that little panel there, but it tests many other things, including other indicators of risk that are important to understand. So I would encourage you, when you go to your doctor and you get your routine blood test, or if you already have issues with heart disease or cholesterol or concerns, or if, God forbid, you're on one of those cholesterol-lowering medicines, that the next time you get that test done, you request that you would like the VAP test. And if the doctor says to you, nah, you don't need that, say, actually, I do. And if the doctor says, well, I'm not going to prescribe that for you, then you say, well, I'm going to go find another doctor because actually, sir or ma'am, you work for me. And you are here to help guide me, but to understand what my sensibilities are and to honor those. Can't say it any more plainly than that. All right, so here are some other blood tests, and this is that thing, that panel that I said is probably important for you to be able to refer back to or take notes about, because these other blood tests are all important for really evaluating where your possible heart future lies. And so number one is called HbA1c. I'm going to go through these real fast. The truth is I could do a whole hour presentation about each one of these and why they're significant. HbA1c is a measure of your blood sugar, not the snapshot. Because when you go and you get your blood test and they say your blood sugar was 90 or 95 or whatever, that is a snapshot of what it is at the moment when that blood was drawn, and that's usually after you've been fasting. Your blood sugar should be low. HbA1c is a measure of what your blood sugar has been every second of every minute of every day for the past 3 or 4 months, so that we can see the spikes and valleys, and we get a number. And we want that number to be below 5.5. Silliest thing I've ever seen in medicine is that with a diabetic, we measure this and we say if you're below 7, you're good. That's an average blood sugar of like 140 or 150. It's awful. We want to see it lower. And understanding where your blood sugar is very important. Again, going back to that basic biochemistry, because it's that sugar that attacks that LDL that turns it into the monster that can become the risk that ultimately leads to the clogging of the arteries. Also be good to know what your fasting insulin is, because your insulin levels are a direct result of those sugar spikes. And if your fasting insulin is too high, that's an indication that your sugar is too much. And it's an indication that you need to make some changes. And mostly those changes need to be with your diet. There's another test that's called CRP, stands for C-reactive protein. The HS stands for high sensitivity. This is a measure of inflammation. Inflammation is a key trigger to all of the processes that are going on in the body that end up in the chronic diseases of aging. If your C-reactive protein is elevated, that's an indication that your inflammatory response to things from the outside world is overzealous, meaning that you get a small trigger and you over-respond inflammation-wise. And that is a key trigger that ultimately leads to not just heart disease, but every one of the chronic diseases, one way or another. Which chronic disease would happen in an individual depends on their genetic tendencies. And so in someone, it might be heart disease. In someone else, it may be neurological issues, or it may be gut issues. So measuring your body's tendency towards inflammation is really, really important. Ideally, we want to see the CRP below 1. If your CRP is between 1 and 3, you're at moderate risk. And if it's above 3, you got to make some changes. And those changes have to do with sugar and have to do with diet, and especially balance of fats. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Homocysteine, very, very important. Your homocysteine is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So homocysteine is an amino acid that is in balance with another amino acid that you get from your diet called methionine. And there's certain vitamins, B6, B12, folic acid, certain B vitamins that help convert homocysteine into methionine. Methionine is a good guy, homocysteine is a bad guy. And you can sort of think of homocysteine as kind of like a little sandpaper sort of molecule. It goes through the inside of the blood vessels and it makes a little scratch. This is a little bit simplified, but I'm explaining it in a way that makes sense. And that scratch is the very beginning of the clogging of arteries, because that scratch is an indication to the body that something's wrong and it wants to go and try to fix it. And when it fixes it, it makes a little bump, and that bump says, oh, wait, that's not right. And it keeps adding to it and ultimately leads to clogging of the arteries, atherosclerosis, those plaques. And so knowing what your homocysteine level is, now on the blood test, it might say that anything below 11 is good, and that's still too high. We want to see it below 8 generally. And then vitamin D, very, very important. Least expensive test that can be done, and probably the most important one. And doctors are just starting to understand the importance of vitamin D in genetic expression, not just in relation to cardiovascular disease, also obviously in relation to osteoporosis. Lots of women get that tested and get on a prescription medicine to increase their vitamin D if they're at risk for osteoporosis, but it plays a very important role in cardiovascular health, with brain function, with brain chemistry balance. So I'm talking about mood and depression and anxiety, and also the immune system. Very, very important. I did a whole webinar just about vitamin D that you can find on my website and listen to. All right, so let's talk about, let me back up for a second. I want to remind you that if you have questions, type them into the question box and it shows up right on my screen so I can answer them for you. But either I'm doing an excellent job or you guys are just so dumbfounded with the information that you're just sitting there gape-mouthed, just can't believing that this is so different than what we've been taught. So let's talk about the statin drugs for a little bit. And I love to talk about the statin drugs. So first of all, let's talk about the claim. So there was a meta-analysis done, a meta-study back in 2006. And what that did was it reviewed 7 different drug trials involving better than 42,000 patients for 3 to 5 years. And what this study showed was that there was a 29% decrease risk of a major cardiovascular event, that's code for a heart attack. And this is the basis of which your doctor will tell you that you should take a statin drug, because it will reduce your risk of having a heart attack by about 1/3. That sounds like a pretty good statistic, right? If you take that little Lipitor or Pravachol or whatever it is, it's going to lower your incidence of having a heart attack by a third. That sounds reasonable. However, that statistic comes about by analyzing the data in a very, very specific way. And I apologize because I know this can get a little bit complicated, but I really want to explain it because it's important to understand. Those numbers and the basis of which the doctor will tell you you should take a statin drug are not accurate. They're faulty. That quote unquote 1/3 risk reduction is valid when you look at what's known as the relative risk. But heart attacks were relatively rare in those 42,000 people anyways. And so the reduction of actual risk is quite different. And that's a difference between relative risk and actual risk. So I'm going to give you an example just using some simple numbers so you understand. So let's imagine that I've got a drug that's going to treat a disease. I think it's going to treat a disease. If I'm going to study it, what I'm going to do is take 100 people, and I'm going to give them a placebo, a sugar pill, and I'm going to take 100 people, and I'm going to give them my drug. We're going to call it drug X. And then we're going to see what happens to them over a period of time, let's say for 2 years. And let's say that my drug was supposed to cut down on heart attacks. So the way we find out whether it was useful or not is to then compare those two groups, the group that got the active drug versus the group that got the sugar pill. So let's say that we're looking at heart attacks, and in the group that got the sugar pill, 3 people had a heart attack. And in the group that had the drug, 2 people got a heart attack. That's a reduction from 3% to 2%. The relative risk is that I just lowered the incidence of heart attack by a third. But the actual risk was just a lowering of 1% from 3% to 2% because 97% of those people didn't have a heart attack anyways. This is the basis by which the pharmaceutical industry sort of muddies the water in telling you that something is going to be effective for you. So there's another way to analyze medical data, statistics from studies, that is the most valid way to know whether something's going to help you or not. And it's really simple. And I would encourage you to ask your doctor about the number needed to treat. That's what it's called, NNT, or number needed to treat. And I cannot tell you how disappointed I am to find out that most doctors don't even know what number needed to treat is, much less how significant it is. It asks a very simple question, and that is how many people need to take a drug for how long to avoid getting whatever it is you're trying to avoid. So in this case, we can ask from that same study that said that supposedly you're going to lower your incidence of having a heart attack by a third. From that same study, we ask a simple question. How many people need to take a statin drug for how long for one person to avoid having a heart attack? Now, according to the statistics that they publish, that answer should be 3. 3 people need to take it for one person to avoid having a heart attack. That would be that 33%, basically, or a third. Are you ready? Do you know what the number needed to treat is from those same statistical data? 60 people, that is 60 people need to take a statin drug for an average of 4.3 years for one person to avoid having a heart attack. When you hear those numbers, do you think it's more likely you're going to be that one person or you're going to be one of the 59 people that doesn't get a benefit? And that's not even looking into all of the cost and side effects that you can get from the statin drug, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So that last little box that came up there, no statin drug has ever shown a reduction in all-cause mortality. By study, no statin drug has ever equated to anybody living 1 day longer. I want you to think about that. Now, I got a bunch of questions that came up here, so I'm going to answer these questions. Bonnie's asking, what should the vitamin D level be? That's a good question, Bonnie. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version because, again, we could talk about that topic just for an hour. And in fact, I did with another webinar. But ultimately, we want to see that level into the 50 or 60 range. Even though that blood test may tell you that 30 is normal, we want to see it into the 50 or 60 range. And Shirley asked the same question, so there you go. Gary's saying, if the LDL is small and dense, pattern B, that's right, that's what it shows up on the VAP test, that's pattern B. What do you suggest to change the expression to pattern A? Is it eliminating sugar? Is it genetic or combination? Good question. I'm going to get into that. We're going to talk about that and how to make more fat, fluffy molecules and less small, dense molecules. And Lenora said, I'm doing a great job. Thanks. Appreciate that. All right. So let's talk about real quickly how statins work. They're known as HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. And what that means is that they interfere with a process that that's very early on in that 25-step process that leads to making of cholesterol. But that same enzyme, HMG-CoA reductase, is responsible for the production of coenzyme Q10, which is a very important nutrient that the liver makes that helps with the production of energy and the protection of cells. And part of the side effect profile that happens from being on a statin drug, as well as 140 different prescription medicines, is the depletion of coenzyme Q10. There's also a protein called G protein, which is very important for communication from cell to cell under stressful conditions. And CoA reductase inhibitors stop the production of that G protein as well. So what are the side effects of the negative effects of statins, or side effects? Well, there's two categories. There's ones that they tell you about and ones that they don't. So the ones that they tell you about are the liver damage and the muscle damage, and that's why you have to have tests done. And that's why if you start taking a statin drug, the doctor will, be responsive to if you tell them your muscles are getting sore. Although they all work the same way in the body. They're different chemicals, but they all work the same way in the body, and it dumbfounds me how a doctor will say, oh, well, if Lipitor gave you that, muscle pain, then I'm just going to try Pravachol instead. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Well, what about all the ones that they don't tell you about? Heart failure, because reduction of coenzyme Q10 means that cells can't produce energy properly and the heart can't work the way it's supposed to. So we put somebody on a statin drug because we're concerned about the cholesterol, and a year later they start to show signs and symptoms of heart failure. In medicine, we don't say, oh, it's the statin drug. We say, wow, this heart condition is getting worse. Let's give you more medicines. Diabetes, arthritis, neuropathy, those last two things, the neuropathy and the memory problems, can't tell you how often people are showing up these days, younger and younger even, with memory problems and things that look like dementia and Alzheimer's, and they've been on statin drugs for years. And it's really that's causing the problem. Or there's newer information showing that ALS, that very rare Lou Gehrig's disease, not so rare anymore. And there's definitely an increased incidence with people that are on statin drugs. Okay, so here's the question. Should we even try to lower cholesterol in the first place? And so the answer lies in understanding biochemistry. And I want to tell you about a recently reported 17-year-long study that I think is important and really says it all. So this study looked at a population of elderly people over a 17-year period that started in 1990. And it was reported in 2011, although I'm willing to bet that you didn't see anything about this in the mainstream newspapers. Researchers wanted to look at physical frailty and mental decline and overall longevity as a function of cholesterol levels. So what they did is they looked at three factors with cholesterol. Number one is the blood levels of cholesterol. Number two is the ability of the liver to make cholesterol. And number three, the ability to absorb cholesterol through the gut. And what they found that low values in all three of those measures, and again, making cholesterol, blood levels of cholesterol, and whether you could absorb cholesterol through your gut, all three measures were low. That coordinated with a poorer prognosis with frailty, mental decline, and early death. A reduced ability to synthesize cholesterol in the liver had the strongest correlation with those poor outcomes. And what are we doing with statin drugs? We're interfering with the body's ability to synthesize cholesterol. And in fact, the group with the highest measures in all three of those areas enjoyed, on average, a 4.3-year extension in lifespan compared to those whose measures were low. So understand that statin drugs interfere with the ability to synthesize cholesterol. And this is direct proof that taking a statin drug results in decreased quality of life and likely a shortened lifespan, not an enlarged lifespan. Also understand that frailty and mental decline are both accepted as a natural part of the aging process. And so if you or one of your parents is on a statin drug and they're starting to show that decline, what we normally say is they're just getting older, and we do not equate that the statin drugs with that. Okay? So the answer is no. We should not even try to lower their cholesterol, especially if you're over 50. The only exception to that rule is that there are a very small group of people who have a genetic quirk where their livers overproduce cholesterol, not just producing cholesterol for physiological need, but actually overproducing cholesterol. But those are tremendously high numbers. John's asking, do antacids affect cholesterol? Not necessarily. I mean, it can, in the fact that when you are taking an antacid, you're cutting down on the acid in the stomach, which then affects digestion. And so when you eat an animal protein, you are interfering with the ability to break it down to its smallest parts. One of those smallest parts would be cholesterol. So you eat an egg, the yolk in the egg contains cholesterol. Ideally, you break that down into its smallest parts so you can absorb that. And if, as you age, just by natural, aging process, your acid production decreases, or if you're from the outside world, either because of antacids or the H2 antagonists or the Zantacs of the world, then that can affect it that way. Good question. Appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about how we can age better in regards to heart health. First of all, if you have to look at cholesterol, look at the particle size. It's very, very important. And as Gary asked, what can you do to increase the particle size? What can you do if on that VAB test you see that you're mostly pattern B, which is small, dense molecules? Number one, fish oil. Number two, niacin, a simple B vitamin. Both of those things have been shown to increase the density of your cholesterol molecules. And it makes perfect sense. Why? Because of cutting down on inflammation, on converting homocysteine, all of the other risk factors. And there are other things that also increase particle size, all the things that we're going to be talking about. All right, so how about getting your body to handle sugar better? Very, very important. So number one, you have to cut down on processed and refined sugars. Obviously, that's cakes and candies and donuts, but you know what else is a source of those sugars? Anything that's grain-based. I did a whole webinar about being on a grain-free diet, and I would encourage you to do that. And if you have cholesterol issues, if you have heart disease issues, if you have concerns about family history, meaning that you have a family history of heart disease, get off of anything that's grain-based for 3 months. Just do it for 3 months. It's a 90-day challenge. And look what happens to your blood and your cholesterol. Look what happens to your waistline. Look what happens to your energy and your sleep and your mood, and all sorts of other things will change. You have got to get those out of your diet. Let's see. Bonnie has a question. I heard that niacin is bad now to take to help raise HDL. No, niacin is good to take. It helps raise HDL. It is the component. It is the thing that is known by medicine to help raise HDL, the good cholesterol, and to help increase the size of cholesterol better than anything else. The problem with niacin is that in very high doses, it can cause problems with the liver, and you get a side effect which is called flushing. And so there are forms of niacin that you can take that will cut down on the potential of flushing. And taking up to 1,000 or 1,500 milligrams a day of niacin is very safe for the liver and can really help increase the size of those LDL particles. Let's see. John is asking, does that mean oatmeal? Yes. Oats are a grain, and it should be out of your diet completely. And again, not just for the, because I know that you've read and you see on your package of Cheerios or whatever that the fiber that is in that can help cut down on cholesterol. But think about that. We don't really want to cut down on cholesterol. We don't want to stop cholesterol from being absorbed. I know that's what medicine tells us we want. And that's why we might eat oatmeal every day, because that lowers our cholesterol. We don't want to lower our cholesterol. If you are eating a fiber food because it's stopping the reabsorption of cholesterol in your gut, your liver just increases production if it has the ability to do so. And that's not good for you. Gary is saying niaspan was recently reported as being bad. That's correct. Niaspan is a prescription medicine that, not because of the niacin, but because of the sustained release mechanism, that is used with the niacin is liver toxic. And that is a drug that should not be on the market, and I just don't understand why any doctor would prescribe it. So Steve is asking, what is a good fiber food then, if not grain? You should be getting fibers from your vegetables, from nuts and seeds, and from legumes. That's where your fibers should be coming from. Shirley's asking, what about starches, such as whole potatoes, sweet potatoes, eaten in moderation for carbs? Starches will turn to sugar, not the same as grains will, a little bit less. So yams or sweet potatoes are actually healthier for you. If you're going to eat a whole white potato, try to make it a half of a potato, and try not to do it more than a couple times a week. That's probably a good way to do it. Thanks for those questions. I appreciate it. Okay, so number 2 is you got to get the high fructose corn syrup out of your diet, and you have to realize the hidden sources of that. Go around the grocery store, just go to your pantry and look at things that are in there. Salad dressings, condiments, soups oftentimes have high fructose corn syrup. And the reason is because, well, frankly, we're lazy Americans, and we've been told to be on a low-fat diet. And so we look for packages that say low fat on it. Low fat means high sugar, plain and simple. That's what it means, because if it doesn't have the fat in it, it needs the sugar to have the taste. And so anything that says on a package, low fat or low cholesterol or recommended by the American Heart Association, don't eat, because it's not good for you. That's just the bottom line. And then number 3 is you want to use up your sugars more efficiently. And so that comes to exercise, which is another part of how to age better. You're going to use up those sugars because your body stores sugar in a couple different ways. The first way that it stores sugar is in the muscles and in the liver. And it's in a form that's called glycogen. And that is a readily usable source of energy. So when you exercise, your body wants to go and use that glycogen. It takes about 20 minutes for you to use up your glycogen stores. Then your body is going to start to access your more long-term stored energy. And what do we call that? We call that fat. So that's why it's important to exercise. Also, when you exercise, you actually, as a waste product of using your muscles, make lactic acid. And as it turns out, small amounts of lactic acid are actually an alternative fuel for cardiac tissue. That's actually a good thing. And so the body doesn't make things accidentally. And even though we look at lactic acid as a waste product, it actually is a health-saving mechanism, because you're stressing your heart when you exercise in a good way, and your body responds by giving you something that actually helps the heart function better in small amounts. That can be taken to an extreme, which isn't good. And then this also helps make more of the large, buoyant molecules for you. How about stress? Understand that cortisol, which is the hormone of stress that your adrenals make, equals negative genetic expression. So if you have a tendency towards something like diabetes or cardiovascular disease, under stress, your genes are going to have a tendency to express themselves more in the negative. Also, your body uses cholesterol to make cortisol. And if your cholesterol stores are needed, or your cholesterol production is needed for cell membranes and repair, when you are constantly under stress, you're constantly stressing that system, is a way to put it. Also, like to put the importance of sleep here. Very, very important. If you're not getting proper sleep at proper time, tremendously stressful to your body, tremendously stressful to your adrenals. I did a whole webinar about sleep, and I would encourage you to go listen to that. It's 45 minutes of really important information that talks about sleep and why it's important, and when the best when the best time is to sleep. Between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's key time for your liver to regenerate and repair. And remember, we're talking about liver function here when we talk about cholesterol and sugar and processing of sugar. And if liver does not get the opportunity to regenerate and repair, it can't function properly. And so every hour of sleep that you miss between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., it takes 2 hours to make up. Think about that. All right, and how about in the supplement world? So number 1, fish oil. Very, very important. It's anti-inflammatory, helps cells communicate with each other. So a proper source of cholesterol. Vitamin D3, very, very important as well. And again, those levels should be higher than what generally medicine tells you. Typical dose of vitamin D3 would be 5,000 units a day. We as a species, us living indoors and out of the sun, is a relatively new phenomenon. Genetically speaking, we did not develop under that condition, and we cannot thrive under that condition. Ubiquinol, that's the active form of coenzyme Q10. Very important for production of energy in cells, and especially if you happen to be on a statin drug, you have to replace that coenzyme Q10. And then I put anti-inflammatories here because there are a bunch of herbs and nutrients that can help fight against inflammation, things like ginger and turmeric. And so there are formulas. My favorite one to use is called Zyflamend by a company called New Chapter. And that will help cut down on inflammation, which again is an underpinning. So now's a good time to type in any of your last minute questions. I cannot believe how quickly an hour goes when we're talking about an important topic like this. John is asking, is a little bit of alcohol good, bad, or neutral? Okay, so a little bit of alcohol is fine. We have to qualify what a little bit is, because I've had patients who have said, yeah, I drink occasionally. I drink a 6-pack a night. That's not a little bit of alcohol. And so sometimes our sensibilities about that are not reasonable. Understand that alcohol requires the liver to work harder. There's an enzyme that the liver makes, which is called alcohol dehydroxygenate, and it works to get hydrogenase, and it gets rid of alcohol. And so if we put alcohol into our system, we're asking the liver to to take care of that, and then distracts it. It's also usually a source of empty calories, which don't serve a purpose in your body at all. Let's see. Nita is asking, is honey a good replacement for sugar? Not really. It's very concentrated. There is no good replacement for sugar. We don't need sugar in all its different forms. We just don't need it. And once you get them out of your body, then your taste for sugar is different, and your tolerance for sugar is different. Part of the artificial sweetener problem is that it raises the bar on what sweet is. Gary's asking, what about stevia? If you need to use something to sweeten something, stevia is an herb that doesn't have a glycemic effect, so that would actually be better for you. Or you can use sugar alcohols like maltitol or xylitol. Those are sweet, but they don't have a glycemic effect. They don't cause that same insulin response. They don't end up as sugar in your bloodstream. So to wrap it all up, the number one killer in this country is misinformation, plain and simple. And it's not really about cholesterol. It's about the particle size, and that's important to understand as well. And lowering your cholesterol does not benefit you one bit, not one single bit. All right, got a couple more questions coming in. Let me just let you know that next month my webinar is going to be about osteoporosis, so pay attention to that. You'll see notices about it on the website. And also don't forget that our archives have a lot of our old webinars that you can go to listen to anytime you want, including the topic that you see right there. Shirley's asking, what about caffeine? So caffeine, again, in moderate amounts is okay, but it is not good for your adrenals. And when we stress your adrenals, our ability to make cortisol and respond appropriately to stress gets affected. So it's just not a good thing that we should try to avoid if possible. Steve is asking, so what is a good snack food to replace your sugar crave? So number one, get the sugars out of your diet, and you won't have those sugar cravings anymore. And also understand that lots of times those sugar cravings are emotional. We're trying to soothe ourselves with food instead of what we need nutritionally. Nuts and seeds. If you want to snack on something that's a straight protein. Have a piece of cheese. Take some turkey and roll it up with some cheese. Have some hummus and and vegetables. Oftentimes, when you replace that sugar with fat, it can feel the same in our bodies, and that's a much healthier way to do it for you. Thanks for that, Steve. Lenora said, have you shared on topic seizures before? I haven't. It's kind of a difficult topic because there's so many different reasons for it. Happy to talk to you about it in particular if you'd like, and I certainly will consider that as a topic in future webinars. Thank you for that. Gary asked, how do you protect the adrenals with supplements? Well, activities, getting the processed and refined carbs out of your diet, sleep at the proper time, stress reduction, and that can be counseling or energy work or prayer. And then there are a whole host of herbs and nutrients that are known as adaptogens that can calm the adrenal response to stress. One of my favorite formulas is called Cortisol Calm that has a combination of a bunch of those together. Dennis is asking, can fish oil cause prostate cancer? Absolutely, positively not. That, and I wrote a blog about this. I think you can find it on the website in our blog section, but that erroneous reporting of a poor study did more damage than I can possibly imagine, because I know a lot of men who stopped taking their fish oil because of it. And it gets a little bit technical about how and why, but all you got to do is ask yourself one simple question. If we look at societies that have a lot of seafood, including fish, in their diet, like in Japan or in Norwegian areas, If that were the case, then those would be the people that have the highest incidence of prostate cancer, and it's just the opposite. Thanks for asking that, Dennis. I appreciate it. One final question from John, and that is, are saturated trans fats issues? Well, we just said that saturated fats, those are the ones that are animal proteins, are actually not bad for you. They're good for you. Trans fats, they came about because of the scare with and the need for not having saturated fats, or the idea of not having saturated fats. And those are the worst for you. Saturated fats, not bad for you. Trans fats should be avoided completely. So what that means is margarine, that's like cancer. Avoid it. One more question. Bonnie's saying, cod liver oil better than fish oil? No, not necessarily. Some cod liver oil products are good sources of EPA and DHA, and other ones not. And so it really depends on the product. As far as fish oil goes, if you want a capsule, the one I recommend is called Whole Mega by New Chapter. It's the one that I take 4 capsules a day, 2 twice a day. That's the one that I've seen by study to be the most efficient at incorporating into cell membranes, and that's really the name of the game. Wow. That was a fun hour. Thank you so much. I appreciate your attention. I hope that you found this useful, and please feel free to get in touch with me with specific questions. Everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much.